bright, with sly, secret humor, now dim, grown enormous, still cannot contain the sea within. And I think I'll read one of my few funny poems. This was published first in, let me think, the Paper Mache Press series of anthologies. They did When I'm an Old Woman, I Shall Wear Purple, and many others. And I actually had a friend from high school who has a poem that was in the first book, and I always wanted to get a poem in there, and I kept sending things in, and they chose this poem, and it surprised me. But when I talked to the publisher and the editor, she said it just made her think of her father. It isn't about my father, but it made her think of her father. It's called Senior Golfer. The upside is he's finally shooting his age. The downside is he has to keep finding new partners. His wife says, look for younger friends. Maybe they'll last longer. Now, I don't know, I thought I sent some other poems to them that were wonderful, but she liked that. And I think that's what draws me to poems that I love or that I like, no matter whose they are. It sort of strikes a chord with either something in your heart or in your mind. I did bring, and let me find it here quickly. I had written several poems that were about my father, and then one day my mother said, well, why don't you write a poem about me or for me? So I did, and actually I'll read this poem. This particular poem has been published in more journals and anthologies than any of my other poems. And I will find it here. Oh, it's in a different book. That's why I'm not finding it. This is The Tea Party. And I wrote this after we moved my mother from her home that she lived in many years in Illinois to Dallas into a nursing home. Odd, she thinks, to be sitting in my good maple rocker here in the front yard, shaded by the red plum tree she'd planted as a stick, surrounded by cedar chest, mirrors, brass lamps, cherry wood desk, mops and brooms. She watches tall blue-jeaned men load years of memories into a yellow truck that crushed the daylilies planted along the drive. They'll grow back, she assures her oldest friend, who sits with her, nodding, smiling. They discuss grandchildren, Sunday's church service, yesterday, but not tomorrow, not next year. A quickening breeze carries the scent of her pink Dallas roses. She rubs her arms hard, lifts her face to catch the sun. They'd wanted to pack her best teacups, but she'd told them no. She would use them now, sipping chamomile tea, rocking, talking with her best friend of 84 years. When I read that to my mother, I was a little concerned that it might make her sad, but it didn't. She said, she loved it. Of course, it's always great to have one person that loves whatever you do. That's my mom. Okay. I'm going to read this poem. I don't know that I've ever read this to anyone. Maybe I have. This poem my mother wrote with me. We were just laughing about something, and it's called Worry. Mom worries because she forgets things. I went to visit her last week and left my camera at the airport on a chair. When a taxi driver ferried me back to the airport to find it, I ran inside, forgetting my luggage in the cab. He didn't charge me for the extra trip, said it wasn't my fault. Mom worries because she gets confused. I arrived at the airport for the flight home 3 hours late, misread the ticket. Mom worries about her memory. She's concerned about her confusion. She's only 87. She shouldn't worry about her. She should worry about me. She liked that one. I have a poem I want to read, and I don't think I have the book it's in, but it's in this book. Okay. You should worry about the workshop. I'm going to talk about getting your poems organized. But this poem is one of the first poems I wrote. Actually, this was my daughter and I on this trip, but I wrote it for my mother and I, because it's all the same, isn't it, mother and daughter? It's called Saving for a Rainy Day. I hold this memory in reserve to carry me through darker days. A train ride on a warm summer afternoon from Avignon in the south of France through the Tuscany hills to Florence. My mother and I, laughing together, carefree, claim an empty passenger car, and she flings both windows open wide to the feel of wind and sun, her smile defining delight. We sort through crumpled bags filled with poetry books, postcards, gifts for family and friends, and a soft green scarf that we spread between us to hold our feast of French cheeses and breads, cool sparkling water and ripened peaches, those juices sating us. Then we lean back, relaxed, gazing at the changing countryside, drowsing in the sun together, her hand brushing mine. I hold this memory in reserve. And that really is a poem that, as I said, even though it was my daughter and I on that train ride, when I wrote this poem, I felt that this is the kind of thing, the kind of memory that I had with my mother and my daughter, and that I think all of us have with someone we love, and we can call on those memories when we need to. And later I found that I needed to. Okay. One of the things that I really enjoy doing with my poetry is writing for people. And I think one of the first times I did this was I had taken a group of women to the British Isles for a class when I was teaching. And I believe we were there 3 weeks. We started in Ireland, then we went to Scotland, then we came down to England. It was wonderful. I met a woman. I had just met her briefly, but on the trip, she was one of the students, and I got to know her pretty well. And in fact, we had a sort of tour bus that took us here and there, and we were sitting together one day in Ireland, riding around the Ring of Kerry, which is incredible, and we started talking about her son. And I knew her son. He had been a student at the college and had come to me for counseling several times. And he had cerebral palsy. He was struggled, and that summer had graduated. And when he graduated, it was everyone, applauded and stood and cheered. We got to Edinburgh and stayed there one night and got a phone call that her son had died, which was just shocking. And she went back. And she told me that later that people would say, "Oh, I bet you really feel bad because you took that trip. and you weren't here. I thought, what's insensitivity? She didn't feel that it had been a bad thing, and I wrote this poem to remind her of that. And years later, when my mother died, it helped me. It's called An Irish Farewell. They say there are no coincidences. The women sang "Oh Danny Boy," the only Irish song they could remember, as the bus rounded the ring of Kerry. They marveled at the verdant hills all round, at the deep pink rhododendrons crowding the narrow lane toward Killarney, and the wonder of how they came to be here. Of her 7 children, all grown, Danny was the one who'd most encouraged her to take this amazing journey to the land of mysticism and leprechauns. He understood lifelong yearnings and the joy of reaching goals most deemed impossible. When he'd raced to the stage for his college degree in the wheelchair that had carried him to classes, the cheers swelled his heart, filled his eyes. One other on this journey knew her Danny, and in a pocket of quiet on that Irish bus, they shared stories of his striving and reaching that carried him to the independence he craved. A thrill of joy for him, then serenity settled on the mother's soul. How then to feel, what to think, when the call came from home next morning, telling her he'd gone, finally at peace, the day before. Did he hear the serenade, the words of goodbye? They say when people die, they choose their time. Some must finish tasks begun. Some linger till those they cherish are near. But some are tied in love so strong, they wait till loved ones are away to ease the going. Goodbye, Danny. The pipes are calling. Thank you. Here's a poem I wrote for me. Control. She's got the power now, sitting in the old blue lounge chair, holding a steamy cup of orange zinger tea, with all 3 TV, VCR remotes, and the portable phone in her lap. What more could a modern woman ask? Well, it's for the rest of you, too. Here's one of the poems I said I wrote some for other people, and I had several clients in my counseling practice that actually asked me if I would write a poem for them and about them, you know, sort of. And this is I think this may be the first one. It's very short, and it's called Nonverbal Communication. It wasn't the bruise that told the story, but the way she flinched when he raised his hand to smooth her hair. All right, this one isn't really a great poem, but this woman just really, really, really wanted me to write a poem about her circumstances. And she and her husband had come in for marriage counseling, and they kind of drove each other crazy, you know. So I wrote Incompatibility. She said she felt tired. He said, "You're avoiding me." She said, "I don't want pets indoors." He said, "You're being selfish." She said, "I'm worried about money." He said, "All you do is nag." She said, "I'm afraid of you." He said, "That's stupid." She said, "All we do is argue." He said, "That's not true." She said, "I want a divorce." He said, "No, you don't." She said, "I'm going crazy here." He said, "You're nuts." She said, "So you finally agree with me?" He said, "I told you we were compatible." They are still together, by the way. Having a good old time with their discussions, no doubt. So really the first poems I wrote, I would say, centered around family, friends, clients, things I felt strongly about. And then in the meantime, I was having a lot of very interesting dreams and other experiences of the conscious and unconscious. And I want to read a few of those poems. Okay. Well, here's what, I said I don't do funny poems, but when I do, I really like them, so I guess you're going to have to hear some of them. But I went to hear a talk by Dr. Raymond Moody. I don't know if you know who he is, but he did a lot of research in near-death experiences. And he's a college professor, and he's very serious, and everything must be documented a certain way, and very much the serious professor. And at this workshop, he told a story that I thought was very interesting and bizarre. I wrote this poem right immediately afterwards, and I've wanted ever since to give him a copy of that poem. And I saw him this last weekend. So here's the poem I wrote. Oops, did I say that? Grandma came to visit last night. She's dead, so she came in a dream. She used to be such an unhappy grouch, always mad at the world, it seemed. But last night she was so sweet and charming, I was shocked at her garrulous mood. And I'm embarrassed to say I told her that death had done her a world of good. And he said, yeah. Okay, well, kind of a combination of writing for someone and a poem that's a little bit about the metaphysical or the spiritual. I wrote for a friend of mine. It's called Butterfly Kisses. She was enchanted by butterflies and nature the summer she turned 7 and discovered the green chrysalis attached to the edge of the sliding screen door. For over a week she watched as it changed, developed, gradually turned to black. Then one morning she witnessed a miracle emerge, flutter, and fly away. After that luminous day, she seasoned every I love you and each goodbye to those she loved with sprinklings of butterfly kisses. Her talent for painting nature's gifts grew each year, and she radiated joy to everyone she met on her path, until an accident ended her dreams and her life. Drowning in grief, her father sat in the garden for endless silent days, until in despair he pleaded for help from above. Instantly, butterflies surrounded him. Dozens hovered near. One flew closer still, touching his cheek with fluttering wings that felt as soft as a small girl's lips. A crystalline thrill suffused him. With a long, deep, shuddering sigh, he closed his eyes, brushed away tears, then whispered, "Thanks, little darling. I'll always love you too. Goodbye." Well, I bet some of you pray, and I bet some of you meditate, and maybe it's the same thing. You know, you're kind of just focused. Trying meditation. Silence is hard to find and hold, obscured not by outside noise, but by the chatter inside my head. I try to shut it off, but it only stops when I give up. And I never give up anything for long. All right, I'm going to read a poem that, let's see, why did I write this poem? If anybody likes Beethoven's music, which, you know, I bet some of you do, if you saw the movie Dearly Beloved, it's about his life story. A scene that really moved me was when he was a boy and his father was beating him, and he beat him so severely that it contributed to his losing his hearing. And in the movie, he sees himself escaping instead of staying. And he climbs out the window, and he runs, and he runs, and he runs, and Ode to Joy begins to play. And he runs out into this clearing in the woods, and there's water, and he lays down in the water, and he looks up, and the sky is just filled with stars, and they are playing the music that he wrote years later, Ode to Joy. And it was such an exhilarating feeling that I didn't feel sorry anymore or sad that he couldn't hear. He heard his music in his head. So I don't know why that came to me. I thought it, but I wrote Opening to Joy. Portion of a letter written by Ludwig van Beethoven to his spiritual advisor, the Archbishop of Cologne. As a child, it came to me only in dreams. Music of such beauty and presentation, I rose each dawn with reluctance. Such waking made tolerable only by my strong desire, my need to copy down those notes, so intricate in their composition, and bring celestial sound to those unfortunates whose visions in sleep are silent. There may be those who pity me for the loss of my ability to perceive outside audition, caused at least in part by beatings from my father. I do fear for the soul of a man who would so damage his own son. Yet I entreat you to grant him forgiveness, for that very loss marked the opening of heaven's music to my waking perception. And now I dwell in audience to angels' choirs, whether in dark of night or light of day. I had a lot of people say, where did you find that letter written by Beethoven? Well, I made it up, just in case you were wondering. Yeah, right. But I did check to see who his spiritual advisor could have been at that time. Whether he was or not, I don't know. Okay. Well, I'll go back to something about my mother again. You all know what synchronicity is, you know, seemingly events that occur and you can't figure out why they occur at the same time, but there's something unusual about it, meaningful coincidence, synchronicity. Driving toward home, I grieve the loss of expectations that she can still parent, teach, and be present for me, her gray-haired child. I let go the illusion of her recovery of mind and strength, of wisdom shared. An ancient pickup jolts me to awareness, cutting in front, then braking abruptly. Its orange, bright orange and white bumper sticker jumps out at me. Success is not a destination, but a continuous journey. Finally home, I see a scrap of yellowed paper on the floor in the hall. Picking it up, I read Mother's familiar Palmer Method handwriting. My heart beats loud in my ears, my attention riveted by the date, 12 years ago to the day. It began. Thoughts while waiting in the doctor's office. It's comfortable here. I like to notice my surroundings. You learn a lot that way. There's an interesting plaque on the wall. It says, success is not a destination, but a continuous journey. So true. Thanks, Mom, for the reminder. What really was interesting to me was that I saw that in 3 places before I got home and found that.